Hey everybody, NecroVMX here, and welcome back with another review of a SNES RPG that is a little bit off the beaten track, and that I play through for the first time on Twitch. You might have heard of the Ys series. You might be aware that I'm a huge fan of it. And recently, separately from my project to play all the SNES and Super Famicom RPGs that I could, I also started a Falcom Games Night on Sunday nights on Twitch, which I started by playing some of the older ports of Ys games that I hadn't played before, and this included both Ys 4 games. That's right, I said both, 2 games. Let me explain this briefly. After working on Ys 3 Wanderers from Ys, Falcom went through a bit of a restructuring and downsized to a point where they really couldn't make Ys 4. They came up with the basic outline of Ys 4's story and wrote all of the music for it, and then looked for other developers to make the game for them. They actually wound up selling the rights to make Ys 4 to 3 different companies, though one of them wound up actually not even making a game. Hudson Soft, who had published the TurboGrafx version of the other Ys games, wound up making Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys, which was also for the Turbo CD, though this stayed in Japan. Tonkin House wound up making Ys 4 Mask of the Sun for the Super Famicom, and this one also stayed in Japan, so for the longest time, the United States never got a version of Ys 4. We didn't get 5 either, and we still haven't. The third company was going to make a Sega Genesis version, but that never happened. Both Tonkin House and Hudson followed Falcom's outline, but they each took their own liberties, so they're very different games. They also play differently, with The Dawn of Ys taking inspiration from the TurboGrafx version of Ys 1 and 2, though adding the ability to move diagonally, while Mask of the Sun plays more like the original PC releases of the older games. There later was a third version on the PlayStation 2 by Taito called Ys 4 Mask of the Sun: A New Theory, which also stayed in Japan. I haven't played that one, so I can't really comment on it. For the longest time, fans argued about which was the real Ys 4, with more people preferring The Dawn of Ys since it was considered to be the better game, and it was in development first. But Falcom says it's Mask of the Sun since it adhered to their outline a little bit more. Eventually, this argument became moot when Falcom made their own version on the PlayStation Vita, Ys 4 Memories of Celceta, which you can also now get on the PlayStation 4 and Steam. I had actually never played an Ys 4 game until Memories of Celceta, so I went into the older ones pretty blindly, and I played them back to back. First The Dawn of Ys, and then Mask of the Sun, which I played on the Hygan emulator using a fan translation by Aeon Genesis. So let's talk specifically about Ys 4 Mask of the Sun on the Super Famicom. As usual, I will be rating the game on a scale from 1 to 10 in the following categories: graphics and presentation, music and sound effects, story and writing, gameplay and controls, and balance and difficulty. And of course, a reminder that I use all the numbers on a scale, not just 5 to 10. So remember that a 5 is middle-of-the-road average game, not an unplayable mess. So, graphics and presentation. Coming from The Dawn of Ys to this game is actually pretty jarring, as they look very different, but I'm not really comparing it to that game, as that's on a different system and it seems unfair to do that. Instead, I'll compare it to some other action RPGs that came out the same year, mainly Secret of Mana and The Illusion of Gaia. What really stands out is that Ys 4 has good sprite work and detail, but it is not nearly as colorful as comparable SNES games that came out around the same time. The sprites are a good size and everything is attractive enough to look at, but it's just that the game uses darker colors than you might expect, and it's a bit stiffer than most action RPGs of the time. Rather than make it play like the previous Ys games that had come out on the TurboGrafx, Tonkin House instead made it play like the PC Ys games, so everything moves a bit more rigidly and animates in a more clockwork way. Ys games almost always have great presentation, and this one's no exception. You get really well-drawn cutscenes, a great HUD, and a fantastic menu. There's no issues there whatsoever, and Aeon Genesis made a custom font for the game that I very much liked. I wish I could get this font. The presentation wins here. The graphics are just kind of workmanlike. For graphics and presentation, I give Ys 4 Mask of the Sun a 7. For music and sound effects, well, Ys games are known for their fantastic music, and this is no exception, though for some reason they never seem to sound as good as they could on the Super Famicom. For example, out of all the versions of Ys 3 that came out back then, there was a PC version, TurboGrafx, Famicom, SNES, Genesis. The SNES version kinda sounds the worst, and Ys 5, which is a Super Famicom exclusive, while it has a perfectly fine soundtrack, it's not up to the same standard as other Ys games. It seems that for whatever reason, Falcom's songs just worked best on other hardware, specifically the TurboGrafx. So what this means is we have songs that have wonderful composition, but they are after all the same exact songs as in Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys. They just sound kind of muffled. Now of course, The Dawn of Ys was on a CD and this is on a cartridge. I'm not trying to make an unfair comparison, it's just that I know the Super Famicom could sound better. But sound quality aside, you get all the classic rocking tunes and great meaty sound effects. It's kinda hard to fault an Ys game for just not sounding perfect when you're too busy humming the music. For music and sound effects, I give Mask of the Sun a 7. For story and writing, the story is basically at its root the same in all versions of Ys 4, with Adol traveling to the land of Celceta and wind up running afoul of an ancient god named Eldil, who once ruled over a mighty civilization in the past, and has now been corrupted by a cult led by 3 villains, Garuda, Bami, and Goddess. The Dawn of Ys had the same basic story, but really went hog wild trying to tie the game into the other entries, even going so far as to have Adol travel back to Ys and climb the Dharm Tower again, claiming the Mask of the Sun was the Mask of Eyes from the first game. I mean, what? No wonder Falcom said Tonkin House stuck to their outline more. The story in Mask of the Sun is much more straightforward and easy to follow, with good writing for the dialogue and cutscenes, and the entire thing just makes sense. The Dawn of Ys may be the better game in a lot of ways, but when it came to story, it was kinda nonsense for the most part. Looking at 1993 releases, there really weren't a lot of amazing stories. There was Secret of Mana, there was Illusion of Gaia, which is also nonsense even if I love it, the original Breath of Fire. I mean, Ys 4's only real competition for story was Lufia. Okay, that one had better writing, I'll admit that, but Ys 4 has a great story. So for story and writing, I give Ys 4 Mask of the Sun an 8. For gameplay and controls, this is where I don't get the common opinion. Most people seem to dislike the way that this game plays, preferring the more loose feel that the TurboGrafx game has, where the collision detection very much favors Adol and it's very fast and frenetic. That's fine. Those are all fantastic games. That's not to say that this one is bad just for being more deliberate and requiring a degree of precision. In the older Ys games, not counting 3, you run directly into enemies and Adol would attack automatically. If you hit an enemy head on, you'd damage each other, but if you hit them kind of off-center, Adol would hit the enemy without taking damage, and you could continue pressing forward to combo the enemy into oblivion. In the Dawn of Ys, they made it even easier because Adol could move diagonally. This game doesn't have that. Adol seems to take more damage and the enemies are faster and more aggressive, while Adol moves a bit stiffer, which actually kind of works out since you need to position him very carefully. It's in line with the Ys games on PC and the later re-releases of 1 and 2 on the PSP and Steam, so it's actually more like what I was used to, so I didn't have any issues with this. Yes, the Dawn of Ys is more fun to play since you could take on hordes of enemies, but this game is more challenging and engaging since you have to be careful. For gameplay and controls, I give Ys 4 Mask of the Sun an 8. Finally, for balance and difficulty, this game skews a bit harder. It forces you to stop and grind for money or experience at a few points, and of course, if you're used to the looser TurboGrafx controls, this can come off as very rigid and unforgiving, but I adjusted to it very quickly, all things considered. Ys games always have a pretty good progression of difficulty, with only the TurboGrafx version of Ys 1 having a ridiculous difficulty spike out of nowhere. You know what I'm talking about, that Bat Boss? It's hard in every version of Ys 1, but that was silly hard. Anyways, Mask of the Sun is a very well balanced game, with my only gripe being the last boss, which forces you to just kinda wait for a long time for Adol to do something that lets you damage him, and this isn't really spelled out by the game. And occasionally the boss does things like staying really far out of your reach while spamming his shield abilities so you can't actually damage each other, so you're just sort of waiting for something to happen. The last boss kind of blows. but the rest of the game is pretty great. For balance and difficulty, I give Ys 4 Mask of the Sun a 7. So, with a final score of 7.4, Ys 4 Mask of the Sun is a good game that is worth your time. It won't blow you away, and you probably would rather play either The Dawn of Ys or Memories of Celceta, but it's worth seeing what was the canon version of Ys 4 for a very long time, especially since there's a very well done translation out there.